Welcome back to the Pushing Through Loss podcast, where we share stories, honor resilience, and embrace strength. I am Kalila Green Siciliano, and it is my honor to begin the journey with you. I am here today with Becca, who I've actually known for a really long time, but we haven't seen each other in a really long time. So it's really nice to be able to catch up. And as I was just saying before we started recording, it's such an honor to have people reach out like you who are willing to share their experience and willing to be able to say, yes, this happened. Pregnancy loss is something that happens to so many of us, and we all need to just really join forces because it's not your fault. We're in this together. And the more we hear about it, the more, not that we feel like we can normalize it, but the more at least that we know that we're not alone. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yay. And first, tell me a little bit about your background.
My general background.
Just so people can get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, but I live outside of Boston right now. I spent a lot of years in the corporate world doing a lot of different things, everything from project management to advertising and managing teams. And I was really good at that. But now I do energy work and energy healing. And so
I love that
sort of have a
stuff.
second career that I'm really blessed and fortunate to have. And I spent a lot of my free time kind of in between the transition period between corporate world and this work, doing a lot of coaching and working with a lot of self-development work and volunteering for a lot of different organizations. So philanthropy is something that's dear to my heart. And yeah, I just, now that I've gotten older, I think it's my way of contributing and giving back to the world is through my energy work. So.
I love that. And I love that energy work is something that is so universal to so many people, and yet it's so not available to enough people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, absolutely. And it's the type of work I do. It's everybody's birthright. It's like the energy that is native. I just help amplify it for people, and the transformation that people can experience as a result of being in touch with that, I'll call it human divine energy. It's like God force. It's like everybody has it, but people are more or less in touch with it. And so by holding my field and being able to support others in amplifying their own access to it, so many magical things happen.
That's so beautiful. Tell me, I guess, did your experience in loss lead you to that, or was it something totally different?
I would say that it's been a process. I would say that the loss journey that I've had, because it's been a whole journey and there's been more than one. I think that has kind of gone hand in hand of my finding my own healing and mine being able to say, well, now that I have this space that I'm not mothering, where can I spend that, and what do I get to contribute to the world? So it's been many years of transformation to get to this.
So I guess
it's not always been pretty.
Right. No, I feel like it never is. Pretty is one of those things. Like, I remember the first time I realized what grief was, and I was like, why am I going backwards 10 steps when I feel like I already did the anger thing? I should be done with it. My therapist was like, no, there is no linear form or prettiness to any of this.
Yeah. And everybody's journey is different.
Right.
And I just happen to have had, when I saw your post, I happen to have had many different aspects of this journey, and many different types of losses. And so I feel like I can relate to a lot of different people who are coming to this podcast with different stories. And it's all something that gets to be talked about more. Right. I would say especially the losses that are early on get to be talked about a lot more, because those are the ones that are less disclosed.
Mhm.
When you have a late term loss, as I did, then more people know about it, but I would say fewer people know what to say,
Right.
or how to act around it,
Mhm.
is what I discovered.
It's true, and then they try to say things that they think are helpful, and you're like,
Hmm.
I know you're meaning well, but just I that's not it. That's not
Yeah,
there."
yeah. And it still continues. I mean, I'm 9 months out from my last loss, but I still have moments where I'm like, um, at a playground this weekend with my living daughter, and somebody, asks you how many kids you have, which is happens all the time.
Right.
And you just sort of, there's that beat there, and you're in a public place, and it's not the time. But I feel like the more people who would be aware of this type of thing, the fewer of those innocent questions could happen, or the more ability that I would have to share with a stranger. Yes,
Right.
I actually have two kids, and one, you know, is not with us,
Right.
without having to feel like I'm burdening them with that.
Right.
So,
So tell me a little bit about the beginning of your pregnancy where if you want to start with your daughter first. I know you said you have unfortunately have had multiple losses, but this last one
yeah,
was farthest along. I
yeah.
guess start at the beginning. I know it
With
goes back
I
far,
know
but
there's so many. No, so this pregnancy that uh, it's my daughter Jadee. She was conceived through IVF, and it was
mm,
actually a donor egg process. And she's the direct sibling of my living daughter. Um,
aw,
so we had every expectation that everything would go well,
right.
um, because we had had a successful outcome after I had had many losses through my own eggs,
Mhm,
and gone through my own eggs of IVF and failed with those. So
right.
we're like, okay, we're gonna cut that.
Yeah. So a lot of infertility story to start with, and then getting finally to be able to have a living
Mhm.
child, and then being able to try and use the same donor. It must have
Yeah,
felt like a gift from God at
yeah,
first.
yeah. And we had one more embryo, and I just felt naturally like, okay, now is the time. My daughter was, a year old, and so I weaned her and was able to start, on the drugs and everything. And even as I was driving by the fertility clinic, for some reason, like they were like, oh yeah, this one is probably a 30-40% chance of taking. But I already kind of knew it would happen. I was okay either way. I was like, I felt like I could handle it if it didn't happen, or if it did happen, I was happy with my living daughter. Like, I didn't feel like if it was going to be the will of the universe or God's will or whatever that I was meant to have another child, I would.
Mm,
So this whole story happening was not something that I. It was like an extra twist, right?
yeah.
Um, but even before, when I was driving by the clinic, she told me her name, and it was really interesting because we started a conversation at that point, which didn't happen with my previous, daughter. So, like, she did not communicate with me at all. Like, she
Mm.
just kicked me the entire pregnancy. She came out
I'm
like
here. That's it.
biting my nipples and just being crazy. She's like totally a firebrand, and that's how she was in the womb too. We didn't have a lot of communication, so that when this pregnancy came along, it was like really interesting because I was like very in tune with her. I felt her energy strongly. I felt like I was communicating with her.
Interesting.
Um, and felt very connected, and
Mm,
that she was a very peaceful soul. Um, and yeah, the pregnancy, as opposed to every other pregnancy I had, where there were always like something wrong, something's going on, well, we got to look at this. Even my daughter who's with us there was like a cord insertion issue, and then
oh,
they thought she had a hole in her heart. We went running to Children's Hospital, and they were like, oh no, it's not actually a hole in her heart, it's fine.
oh,
Like,
that roller
there's
coaster
all
is
of
the
this. and
worst.
and having previous losses, it was I had a loss previous to that at 17 weeks, which was discovered pretty early on that it was It was actually an omphalocele, which is when like some of the baby's organs grow outside of their
Oof.
body. And so we, we were going to still carry and go deliver that pregnancy at Children's Hospital in Philly because they had the best program for that.
Mm.
But she couldn't sustain it past 17 weeks. It was
Okay.
too much. Um, so anyway, so we had previous all these scans. And so when we had a scan at 20 weeks with this pregnancy, and they were like, oh, well, there's maybe something going on. Come back in a few weeks and we'll check. I was like, okay,
You're
whatever.
like, yep,
Came
I've
back in a
heard
few
this
weeks. They're
plenty of
like, yeah.
times.
I came back in a few weeks. They're like, oh, yeah, something's weird with her heart. But I don't know. Like, let's go send you to Children's. I was like, so I did not schedule that. It's like the holidays. I did not schedule that very
Yeah.
fast because I was like, okay, yada, you guys are like really over conservative.
Right. And
Blah
you've
blah
taken
blah.
me on a roller coaster with every single
Yeah,
one. So,
absolutely, absolutely. So we went to Children's, and they were like, oh no, this is something that's pretty bad, but why don't you come back? We think it's treatable. We think, we're going to get you through as much of this pregnancy as we can, and then we'll probably have to deliver and fix this. And then we had another appointment, and they were like, oh, no, no, this isn't going to work. Her heart is not compatible. And they were talking at that point, like maybe a heart transplant at birth if I could get far enough. Um, so at that point, we kind of, that was the drive back from the hospital where just sort of like the whole world falls apart. You have this vision and you're committed to this, I'm going to, this next year be, breastfeeding again. And I'm going to have this daughter who I was talking to her all the time and I felt very connected to her. And that's when it was like, okay, this is not what's going to be happening.
right.
I think the actual hardest part was, I went back for another scan. We were trying at that point to just get her as far along as we could.
Mm.
Um, and at that point, at the next scan, they were like, she's gaining fluid. Like this is not good. So
Mm.
she's probably going to pass within 48 hours,
Wow.
is what they told me. So that was actually the hardest period of like, wait, feeling her, still being connected to her, feeling her move sometimes, and waiting for her to pass.
Right.
Um, Not wanting to, but also wanting like that sort of like wanting a resolution
Right.
and wanting her not to suffer. And so a week went by and I put on like 15 pounds of water and I'm like, something is not right. And so I went
Wow.
back and I was like, what is going on? And they were like, oh, yeah, she's definitely, it could be any time. And I was like, this is not right. Like, and I stopped being able to pee. My kidneys had shut down.
Ugh.
And it's something that's called mirror syndrome, which can happen when the baby puts on a lot of fluid and the mother like reciprocates. And I
Mm.
don't know if it's like what the like beyond meaning is. They can't really explain it, but it just felt like, my body was trying to like,
Take on whatever water she
yeah,
had.
keep her alive as long as it could.
Yeah.
Um, so, so she was still there. And then they were having all these emergency meetings at the hospital because it was third trimester. And they were like, well, and they finally decided, like, okay, we need to induce. But I think at that point, there was no expectation that she would survive that process because she
Mm.
was already, failing. Um, so they induced, and 24 hours later, my kidneys are like in full shutdown. They're really concerned about that. And I started
Mm.
getting massive preeclampsia, like headaches and stuff. And they were like, nope, we need to do a
C-section.
C-section. So, so I mean, the blessing of all of this was that we were able to meet our daughter.
Mm.
Um,
How many weeks were
and
you?
I want to say like 33,
Wow.
like that. They were hoping, maybe we could get to like 37 or something. So we were,
I mean,
but that last
33,
week,
knowing that you had so many things leading up to a C-section, 33 is still an incredible amount to get to in terms of gestation. And like you said, the fact
yeah,
that you could meet her and hold her must have
yeah,
been just such a special
yeah.
moment.
It was, and what's so interesting is I was so grateful that she was not suffering
Mhm,
when she was out, and the first 20 minutes, they were I was still in surgery. They were pulling out pieces of my placenta because it had disintegrated so much with all that fluid.
mhm.
Um, so they were up inside my uterus
Right.
for a good chunk of, this time. But I just was for that hour that she lived, I was in it's so strange. I was in a space of just complete peace
Mhm,
and acceptance
mhm.
and gratitude that she wasn't struggle like I didn't witness her struggling. They didn't need to give her any medication or anything.
Right,
Um, and I was able to let my husband spend time with her. And bond with her and hold her because told him I was like, she's been inside me this whole time. I feel very
right.
connected. So, um, and the hospital was great. I mean, like
Yeah,
we went, they were originally going to have to deliver like across the street from Children's Hospital, but we ended up being able to go to the hospital where my first daughter was born, um, to my normal doctor, and they had all of these. The hospitals, they deal with this,
right.
and any OB who's been around a long time has seen this a lot. And unfortunately, because it was the weekend that my OB was out of town at a wedding, like it was a different one who delivered, but I still had all my aftercare, with her,
That's
and
good.
that was important.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's strange to say, but that hour was a highlight of my life rather than being a time of grief. It was a
Mhm.
time of like peace and joy.
Were you still able to communicate with her when you were holding her?
Yeah, I still felt, and actually my grieving process started. I would say it was like 1 week later, like I stopped being able to communicate with her. Like
Oh,
for some reason
interesting.
I felt like I could still, like I felt
Just like she
like
was
we
still
were
here
still in
in
a
some way.
conversation. Yeah.
Right.
And then like since then I haven't had any ability, when I get into a deep meditation or the energy work I do, I feel her as part of all of everything.
Okay.
Like she's in the trees, she's in the air, but I'm not having a conversation. I'm not
Right.
hearing things back, if
Right.
that makes sense.
For
It's
sure. And
just
I
a
think that in a
feeling.
way it almost seems like whatever purpose her soul had, it a week after she officially passed was when she had completed whatever she needed to do. And
Yeah.
it as much as it sucks on this side being like, but I'm not done yet. You
Hmm.
want to still be able to communicate with her, but in a way it almost is a peaceful sign to say she is at peace and she's not, like you said, she's not suffering, she's not still here trying to figure out why her soul hasn't continued on.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very true. And I feel like someday when I cross over, and after this experience, I'm way less afraid of that than I was.
Oh, interesting.
Like, I would say that, you know, I never was like suicidal or anything, but
Right.
toward the beginning, I was definitely like, they did a lot of transfusions on me after I was in the hospital for a week. Like, I was not, just a normal bounce back C-section recovery
Right.
after all of the water and all of the complications. Um, so it's definitely the closest I've come to my own, facing my own mortality. But yeah, I feel like, okay, when that happens, I'll understand what the purpose of this was and the
Mm,
purpose of all of these losses.
right.
Um, like clearly there's something in my life that I'm like, this lifetime is about working through grief.
Right. And I
Uh,
think it's also like you said, since a lot of your losses brought you closer to your energy work and to your
mhm,
spirituality, it's like it was leading you on this path to be able not only to connect with your daughter, but to help other people connect.
yeah, and to the whole world.
Right.
Like the amount of empathy I have now and the um, compassion that I have has
Mm,
increased. for
Mhm.
sure.
Tell me a little bit more about either trying to explain to your living daughter what was going on, if she understood, because obviously you said you started to try again with IVF when she was about a year. So
Hmm.
I'm assuming she's about 2 at the time.
Yeah, she's 2.5 now. She was a couple months shy of her second birthday when this happened, and she was just, I would say, she was just underneath understanding what pregnancy meant and
Mm,
what that was.
mm,
Um, and so it hasn't been there hasn't been a tremendous amount of like need to communicate with her about it.
mm,
Um, there's been a lot of talking about my own feelings with her,
mm,
but not about, I don't think she's at the point where maybe later on she'll deal with processing this loss. And I do intend to, in a couple of months, celebrate Jadee's birthday, and have my daughter be a part of it and have that be kind of an
mm,
introduction, because now she really understands birthdays.
mm.
So now that she's 2.5,
Yeah.
and
That's
I
what,
do want it to be part of her life, you
yeah.
know.
Yeah, because she does have a sister, and in fact she
Hmm.
has many siblings, but this one was the closest one to full term.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really important message to her to say that even though your other daughter is not here and the other babies aren't here, they're still a part of you and they're still a
Hmm.
part of your life. And I know one of my best friends from growing up, um, she experienced also as a partner to a stillbirth. And every
Hmm.
year they now have a daughter who is just younger than my youngest, so she's 6. And every year they celebrate and they bring cupcakes to her graveside and
Yeah.
they'll bring balloons and they'll do something to commemorate the fact that she was here and that she was
Yeah.
alive, even if it was just for a few moments.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like to think that the life that she had was only one of love and peace. You know,
Totally.
there was that period of fear when she was in my womb, knowing, what was happening.
Mm,
And I tried to communicate with her about what was happening.
mm,
Because I remember she was sitting up, like her head was up by my sternum. And at one of the scans, it was right at the end that Friday before the weekend when they were before they had the meeting at the hospital to decide they could induce, like to check and see what was going on. And they hadn't, for some reason, told the ultrasound tech what was going on before she scanned me.
oh, so the
So she's
ultrasound
like
tech is like,
coming
what
in.
is going
She's like,
on?
"Oh, do you guys know what you're having?"
You're like,
We're
yeah,
like,
there's a lot of other questions that
I
come with
and I
that.
just started like crying, and it was like she's like, and then obviously like she saw in the scan what was going on, but after she left the room, you know, uh, because they had confirmed what I knew, which was that her head was up by my ribs, and I was like, talking to her, and I was like, what, you're like, I think you're going to have to come out, and if you want to turn around, that would be okay.
If you want to go head down, we can get this
Like,
out.
and she was like, I just want to hear your heart. It makes me feel safe.
Aw. That's
So,
so beautiful that you were able to have that connection with her. It just
mhm,
I'm getting chills thinking about it
yeah.
because it's something where some people have no connection until the baby's here, right? And
Yeah.
even
Well, with
then,
my other daughter, I had that experience. So I understand that. Like,
right.
no,
And
nothing.
even then I know like a friend of mine who still lives in LA would always, whenever I had babies, she was always like, "How are you doing? I don't care so much about the baby." Like my even my own kids, I was like, "Yeah, they're here. They don't do anything yet." Whereas for me, I was, the second I knew I was pregnant, I was attached. So I get it
Yeah.
from both perspectives. Totally understand. But the fact that you were able to communicate with her in that way, it just is so beautiful.
Yeah. And it had happened before with the 17-week loss as well.
Yeah.
I had, but that was more one way. That was more me talking to her.
Okay.
It wasn't two way, but with that one, I know we had a bad scan, and then we went on we had a Europe trip planned. My husband had to work, and so we were in Paris. Like really tough life,
Yeah.
but we were in Paris, and so he was working at a conference, and I went to Notre Dame, and I was like, I talked to her, and I was like sitting there, and I was like, listen, like this is before it burned, but I was like, this, you know, this is what your body is looking like, and we're going to go the distance on this. Like, we're going to make this happen. But if
And
this
as
is
far
not
as
the
you can
life
get,
that
you
you
can
want to
get.
choose, yeah,
Right.
this is not the life you want to choose, and the NICU and all of that, then that gets to be up to you, because I'm not going to make the choice
Right.
to do, to say that it's not going to happen. So
Right.
I went back. I remember, and I took a bath after that. Not super hot bath, obviously, but took a warm bath, which I don't usually do when I'm pregnant. But I was like, I'm going to take a borderline warm bath now.
That's
And
like my
then,
only saving grace when I'm pregnant is to
yeah,
just sit in a
yeah,
nice warm bath. I'm like, I know
yeah,
it's not too hot. I got
right.
the little rubber
Yeah,
ducky floating.
exactly.
I'm
I
good.
have the same, yeah. I didn't have it in Paris, but I was checking. And then then we went back, and she had passed
So
during
she
that
made the
trip.
decision for you.
That's it. That's it. But with this other pregnancy, because it was two-way communication, it was a very different type of
Mhm.
experience.
Yeah.
I felt like she was guiding and parenting and making the decisions, and I was just sort of along from the ride for the ride.
Yeah. It also
And
sounds like she
also
was
my
a
husband.
fighter.
Yeah. I mean, and my husband as well. Like,
Yeah.
it's definitely changed his life in a way that the first one didn't. And also, that's, I think, it's so much more real having had our daughter Sydney, who's
Mm,
with us, like, um it's so much more real for him
right.
what was lost. And
Right.
before, we hadn't had a child, and it was more conceptual.
Mm, right. Because you
And
you know what it's like to be pregnant, but he doesn't.
yeah.
So now that you said you're about 9 months following losing
Mhm.
her, tell me about how you've been. What has been helpful and what has been something that you think people should know because it sucks and it's really just that, the recovery.
Yeah. Yeah. um there have been a lot of things that have been helpful. I Having been off social media for a long time, I kind of got back on.
Mm,
And it was kind of weird to get back on and then sort of start up with this, but I just felt like I needed to be more connected.
mm,
Um, and I just, kind of, and this was only Instagram, because like Facebook was too much, too
right.
broad. I had fewer people I knew on Instagram, but I just kind of put a call out for people if they wanted to send, because nobody knows what to do,
Mm,
just to send, a stone or a little memento or a token or something, and that I would create a little shrine or an altar.
mm,
And it's just the notes that I received from people far and wide, like some people that I hadn't connected with in many years, like just wrote the sweetest things, or sent
mm.
a little hand sewn thing, or a little, like,
Aw,
something they picked out that spoke, to them. Um, and yes, it was for her shrine, but it's care of me,
right.
you know. And my two best friends flew across the country. They both have kids, so they got childcare, flew across the country at different times to
Aw,
help. Um, and it was really great, because I am not somebody who can ask for help easily.
right.
So they just showed up. My sister, two sister-in-laws, different points, just were here, and they were present, and they
Mm,
were in it, and with whatever, on the days that, I mean, the hormone stuff is real. Like, there there is a hormone crash,
yep.
and you cannot not go through that.
Nope. And your body's still going to be producing
They,
milk and your body's still going to think that you have a
exactly.
baby. And it's a
And
weird
when
feeling.
and when my daughter cries, that milk is going to start dripping,
Yep.
and that's just going to create its own, level of grief.
Right.
And I think the grieving process was, I mean, now from a 9 month view, I'm sure it'll be different even in a year or another 2 years, but um, it was harder and easier than I ever expected.
Mhm.
Harder in the sense that there were more like flat out times on the floor just crying and just having to let it out, and and not being able to like just like I cannot spiritually bypass this. I cannot,
Mhm.
you know, not I have to the only way out is through. I just
Yep.
have to like go through the emotional like part of it and release that and let
Yep.
it go.
Yep.
And for as long as that needs to happen. And my friends held space for that.
That's amazing.
Um, what I will say is that I had close family members who did not know what to do and did
Right.
not know how to hold space. And that had to be, some boundaries and things that were drawn as a result of
Mhm.
that. Like it's just, and it's nobody's fault. Like now I could see like, it's just people don't know how to be with a grieving process that they can't fix.
Right.
That there's, or if they don't have the emotional intelligence to be able to even hold a conversation with somebody who's going through that, or to
Right.
be present in a way that's supportive, then it just, I remember I was like only a couple weeks out and my brother came over and was like trying to talk to me about his taxes. And I just lost my mind. I was like, I like, what?
I can't even process the
There's
words,
been
let alone the
there was
conversation.
no conversation up to that about how are you doing or
Right.
what, you want to tell me what, it was just like, but there was a lack of ability to know what to do. And so
Right.
people just try to bypass that. And that's not helpful to somebody in the process, or at least not to me, I guess.
Right. And it's funny because I actually talk about that a lot in terms of number one, creating your community. And I think the key aspect to that is, like you said, creating the space where people allow you to do what you need to do. So I had a friend, for example, who I had no idea she had a miscarriage before I met her. I mean, it's not something you bring up in a normal everyday
No, and that's
conversation.
that's a whole different level of grief when you have these losses. Or one other one I experienced was like we got all these donor eggs and they fertilized great and then they all died,
Right.
or my own eggs that they harvested that would fertilize and then wouldn't last the week,
Right.
like those are other types of losses. There's still a loss of what you've created in the future.
Right. Right. And it's so important that when people can hold that space for you. We sat on my couch and she literally said, I'm here. And I just started crying. And she's
Yeah.
like, it's okay. If you need to cry, whatever you need, I'm here. And I remember a few weeks later, every time I saw her, I would start crying. Like she didn't even need to ask me, how are you? I would just look at her face and start crying. And I said to her at one point, I really just want to get back to being able to laugh with you. And she said, it will happen. I know it will happen. Give yourself grace. And that's the other thing I
Hmm.
tell people all the time. And what I speak about is that you really have to give yourself grace. So, those two aspects of being able to create your community to set the boundaries of who you're going to allow in is totally acceptable. And also being able to give yourself grace to say, this is what I'm feeling right now. And that's okay.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
So
I think
tell me, go ahead.
other things that helped were therapy for a time, you
Yes.
know. But then there was also a time when I was like, okay, I don't really want to go back into this now.
Right.
I like there were times for a while I needed to talk it out, and then after a while it was like, okay, I'm just going to put myself back in this energy
Right.
that I don't need to be in right now that doesn't feel authentic, and so um and the same thing, there was a beautiful free support group that through the like a state, I'm
Hmm.
sure they're throughout the country, but the one here is called Empty Arms, and that was once a month, and I did it I think 3 times, and then it was
Hmm.
like, okay, that was great,
Hmm.
and now it's not. I'm good, you know.
Yeah.
There were a lot of women who had their own timeline who that were different than mine who were on it for a long time, you
Hmm.
know. Um, and everybody's loss and timeline are different, and I kind of learned that there. But I also learned that okay, my compassion for them doesn't mean that I need to be in this space to hold space for them when
Right.
I feel complete.
Right. That's actually one of the things that we had here. It's called HEAL, HEAL.
Mhm.
And they do, I think, 2 or 3 per year, and it's a set required time. So I think it's either 7 weeks or 9 weeks. I don't remember
Mhm.
honestly. And you're with a cohort of the same people every single week. It's once
Mm.
a week. And now looking back on it, first of all, I cherish those ladies that I met there, and we have a
Yeah.
text communication with each other that we're getting updates on who now is pregnant, who is having a baby, who's
Mhm.
not ready yet. All those things that you feel like you can't talk about with just the normal person that you're friends with, to say,
Yeah.
how do I bring up the fact that I want to have another baby, but I'm terrified, with somebody who I have
Mhm.
no idea if you've had a miscarriage or not, versus the ladies that I met in that group. I know what they've been through. We all share
Yeah.
that common bond without even having to speak about it. And so for me to then say to them, here's my what ifs, here's my fears, and here's what I'm excited about, they get it right away.
Mhm. Yeah. I would say that's something that's very thinking about that, that's very been very triggering to me still is, um, I know some people who are on the home birth kick,
Mm,
and while I love that,
mm,
there's a certain, like, um, tone there that to me feels shaming
mm,
to the experience that I had, or
right,
like blame, like the the experience of I had to have a C-section with my first daughter too. She wasn't engaged right, her neck cord was around her neck. She was face up, tons of things.
right,
Induction for 24 hours, like the whole thing.
right.
And then the answer is like, oh well, you shouldn't have ever been induced, or you shouldn't. It's like this whole
Right.
chain of um, distrust for the medical system. And while I
Mm,
do know other women who have had not good experiences in the medical system. It's just
mm,
so that's something that I'm still working through, that trigger of
right.
like feeling not good enough or feeling like I didn't get that experience.
And it's hard because when you say, people then will say, "Oh, so did you have a natural birth?" Well,
Hmm.
what does that mean? I had a birth. My
Yeah,
child is here or my child is not here. Like, they're
yeah,
both normal and they're both natural. And yet one happens through C-section and one happens vaginally. So, however, I'm a doula also. And I always say, healthy mama, healthy baby. That is all we can
hmm,
hope for. And again, that goes with breastfeeding afterwards. If you, for some reason, can't breastfeed, healthy baby, that's what
yeah,
matters. So if you can bottle feed, do it.
yeah,
It's about your choices, and it's about the respect that people should have for the mom and the husband and what that means for their family, or
hmm,
however your family is made up.
hmm.
It's so difficult. And it's one of those where I always say to my kids, and I go back to this all the time, you can only control your own speech, your own thoughts, and your own actions. Whatever other people do is on them, and they can deal with it with God. Where
Hmm.
I know that I don't want to mom shame. I don't want to sit here and say, your way is better than my way, or my way is better than your way, or whatever it is. We all have our own stuff. We all have our own baggage. We all have our own traumas, and we need to have that empathy. Like you said earlier, this has made you a more compassionate person and a more empathetic person. I wish that more people could understand that part of it.
Hmm. And and something else interesting is like it made me more part of my community.
Interesting.
One thing that happened early on, because we moved during COVID, we kind of knew our neighbors, but we'd met them, but they all knew I was pregnant. And
Mm,
so I missed a party for one of a daughter across the street. It was
mm,
like a birthday party. Um, and I wanted to acknowledge that I missed that because I was in the hospital and I had to acknowledge why.
mm,
And then it was like one of those things about like going through the barrier of asking for support,
mm,
like saying, hey, and can you let our other neighbors know what
mm.
happened? Because then I didn't have to repeat that 5 times or for people to see me not pregnant on the street and ask. And, like,
Right. Oh, is the baby at home?
yeah, yeah, it's just, I avoided my hairdresser for a
Oh,
couple of months because I knew. I knew like her
Right.
sister was pregnant and due at the same time as, so I knew as soon as I went in, it would be this whole thing. And I was not prepared to face that
Right.
until I'd gotten to a certain point in my process where I knew I could
Mm,
handle it.
mm. Yeah, there definitely is a almost like a switch where you go from not being able to discuss any of it. You don't want to mention it.
Hmm.
You don't want to talk about it, but yet you want other people to acknowledge it. And
Hmm.
then all of a sudden you say, I don't want people to forget. I don't want this life to just disappear. And I'm going to talk about it. And I'm going to be okay with talking about it.
Hmm. Yeah.
I don't know when that switch happens, but I feel like for everybody
Yeah.
it's a different stage of that grief to say, okay, now I'm working through it. I have to live on the other side of grief. I have to not only live, but you have another child who's here. You have to
Hmm.
thrive for her. And so
Yeah.
there's this process of then saying, okay, I'm making that choice to continue and to be here for her and to be here for myself and to be here for my husband, but to also remember the baby that I lost.
Hmm. And one thing probably because of a lot of the coaching work that I've done in the past, I didn't, I really didn't go down the road of why me,
Mm,
you know, why is it like pity stuff.
right.
Like, I think I had handled a lot of that. Um, but I know with my first pregnancy or my first major loss, I had more of those thoughts. But
Mhm.
this time I knew it was like, I could catch it because I'd had the practice of like, oh, that train of thought is not going to get you anywhere, you
No,
know.
it's not helpful.
And yes, you can wallow on the ground and cry and sleep all day today because that's what you need to do to process the emotion. But you don't get to go down that whole like pity party thing
Right.
like that, and mentally it's just not going to serve you. So
Right.
I that's something that really like was not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, I actually heard an interesting story about Christopher Reeve one time who funny enough we went to the same high school but at very different
Hmm.
times. But after his accident, somebody had said, and I heard this recently, so it was obviously after he passed away, but somebody had said that when he was in the hospital, which he was for a very long time after his accident, that he would throw himself a pity party for 10 minutes every day. And that was it. And for those 10 minutes, he would wallow in that awfulness. He would ask all the why me's. He would say, what am I doing here? And then after that 10 minutes, he'd be like, okay, I'm done.
We're
It's
done.
time to move on to the next thing and to either do my therapy or to eat or to shower or whatever it is that the nurses need to help me do. And I'm done. No more pity
Hmm.
party.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because it is okay to acknowledge the why me's and it is okay to question, even if your faith in God is really strong. I was angry with God for a little while and that's
Hmm.
okay. All of it is okay. All of it is normal as long as you process it and as long as you don't sit in it and wallow in it like you
Yeah.
said and stay there.
Yeah. And I wonder if that's some people's process,
Mm,
like like where some people are at in terms of like for me in my spiritual belief, many lifetimes. That's just my own,
mm,
I, when I met my husband, and still to this day, I am quite sure we have been together before. Like, I just have this comfort level with him that just transcends. I am at peace and have been,
mm.
you know,
That's awesome.
um, and it's beautiful. And so, like, but there have been certain things that I'm working on, I feel like,
Mm,
in this life. And clearly, this is one of those
mm,
things. Other people maybe are in a different space. And so they want to play at this feeling more
mm.
or be in the feeling of it more.
Right.
Um,
And I think and again that's okay. My feeling is that and again, I'm not mom shaming, I'm not telling anybody what you're
mhm.
doing is right or wrong, but my feeling is that there has to be a point where you say I'm still here and I need to learn how to live here. I can't keep living back there. I can't keep going through all the what ifs. I can't keep going through the idea that if they were still here, I'd be a different person because they're not here. And this goes
Yeah.
for any type of loss, whether you've lost a child or a parent or a grandparent or a sister or brother, whatever. There has to be a point that you get to, and whatever point that is, whether it's right away or a year later or a few years later, that you say, I'm still here.
Hmm.
What does that mean?
And be in the present moment.
Right. Right. And like you said earlier, that you have this conviction that one day you will meet not only the child that you lost so late in
Mhm.
gestation, but all of your other losses.
Mhm. Mhm. And I'll understand the purpose in the greater scheme of
Right.
my life, right? Like, which you can't see when you're in
For
it.
sure. For sure. And it's and maybe you will never understand that here on earth, but hopefully you'll get
Yeah.
that peace.
Yeah.
Totally.
Other things I did, two other things, I guess, a
Okay.
couple other things. One, I got ducks, which I've
I
wanted to
love
do.
that.
I wanted to do like in a couple years, right? It was one of those things, but like after this, I just ordered them. And these
I
baby
love
ducklings
that.
showed up. They were in my kitchen, but it got me up and doing something because I have to feed these ducks and I have to
Right.
like, now I'm like at the point where I collect their eggs every day and like I feed them and I let them out of their house in the morning at sunrise and I put them back in, it gave me a routine and something to nurture
Right.
that wasn't on the same level as nurturing my daughter, which
Right.
takes a lot more energy. And this is more like it got me up and moving and in a routine.
And certainly not with a toddler who can talk back, where the ducks just have to rely on you to be like, oh,
I
we're
know.
getting let out.
Oh, although I did get a goose that's the bodyguard of the ducks, that one talks back.
Ah!
She actually is the one that imprinted on me and like follows me everywhere and squawks when somebody comes on the property. It was like
Oh
this
my gosh,
crazy
that's
thing.
hysterical.
So I have a guard goose, and it was great. But it was, an example of something. And then there was also like a spiritual retreat that I was able to go to in September that really got set me straight,
Mhm.
and gave me the space to kind of, I don't want to say process because I wasn't processing intellectually or even emotionally. It was just like being um, being deeply inside of myself
Mhm.
moved me more forward than I think any of the other things I'd done.
Right.
Um, just having the space where, my mom was taking care of my daughter during the day.
Right.
We were in a different place traveling. It was I had a friend, another, another thing that helped. I had a friend who had had a loss um, at term. Their son passed away the night before he was scheduled to be
Ugh.
delivered by C-section. And that happened 3 months before my loss. And so I reached out, and I was like, what have and so we've been sort of like bonded in terms of like this crazy thing that happened to both of us. But
Mhm.
he was like, get out of town. And so a month after, we were on vacation. We actually went to Jacksonville and went up to St. Simon's Island in Georgia in
Nice.
February, and like it was peaceful and beautiful. And then
Yeah.
a couple of months later, we went out to California and didn't see all of our friends. We just went and
Right.
stayed in the canyon and you know had some warm weather. And so getting out of town, changing the scenery,
Yep.
um, really helped break me out of the sort of like moping around the house thing that was happening.
Yeah. It's funny because I actually have one of the opt-ins that I have is that I have a 30-day calendar to activate your inner strength warrior. And every day has a different step that you can take. And it's funny because the other
Mm-hmm.
day I was just talking about how even planning a road trip that takes you 30 minutes or an hour outside of town just to get out of your mundane day to day, it sometimes breaks the monotony. It breaks up
Mm-hmm.
that motion of your brain that everything happens in the same way, in the same pattern, and you can't get out of it, versus even just taking a drive to the beach or to the mountains
Yeah.
or something to get you out of you right there. It
Mm-hmm.
helps your brain reset in a way.
Yeah. Because you're in a new environment, so
Right.
you're not in the same loop, same
Right.
feedback loop over and over again.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I have in my workbook that I wish everybody did. My best friend's daughter taught me this years ago, and I'm like, this is gold that should be taught in school, where she has a calendar that is just a box for every single day of the year. So it's 52 weeks, 7 days for every single day. And every day she puts the color of the overreigning emotion that she had. So she assigns at the beginning of the year or whenever she starts it, like let's say red is anger, yellow is peace, purple is
Mhm.
contentment, whatever it is. And at the end of the day, she'll fill in the little square with that emotion and that color. And it creates this beautiful tapestry of all these different emotions that you feel throughout the year, but it separates the days. So you can go back to a random day for the year, let's say, whatever, March 7th, and say, how was I feeling that day? Because I feel like
Mhm.
March 7th was yesterday. And yet
Yep.
now it's November, or now it's January, or now it's whatever. And I think that I'm in the same emotional space that I was. But if you look back, then you're like, no, wait a minute. That was its own individual day, and I am now feeling something totally different.
Mhm. That's great. I love that.
Yeah, I know. I
Uh,
wish there were certain things about resiliency and understanding yourself and processing emotions that I wish they taught more of in school.
mhm. Speaking something like that, I part of a women's group, and it's like a goal group, but we have partners, and so we have daily check-ins during the week.
Oh,
So
nice.
throughout this, it wasn't the same sort of check-ins that I would have thought I would have been doing. I
Right.
thought I was going to be checking in on, having a baby and doing all this stuff, but really it was just checking in on, like, did I meditate today? Did I take a shower today? It was bare minimum.
Mhm.
Will I cook 3 meals this week?
Mhm.
Simple goals that were moving me forward a little,
Mhm.
and weren't more than I could do, but were maybe sometimes a little stretchy. And then part of that was always having some daily gratitude.
Mhm.
Um, and those things, and having a couple of women to be accountable to, checking in with every day,
Mhm.
and not even about how I was feeling, but just being in communication with,
Right.
really helped me rebound.
And it's sometimes better when it's somebody who's removed from the situation, because your husband could have also done that for you, but he's going through his own grieving
Yeah,
process.
which is totally different than mine. I don't know
Right.
if you experienced that, but I mean, he was completely action oriented, and I was completely like, I'm just going to stop and get all this grieving done,
Yeah.
and then I'm going to restart. And he was like, I'm going to meditate twice a day because I promised my daughter that I would do that. And I'm going to and I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week. And I'm going to go play tennis and I'm going to go play basketball.
Wow,
He
he
was
was
just like
really action.
full on active. And I went full on, just like sleeping as much as I possibly could
Right.
and just getting through the grief part
Yeah. My therapist said
and
that.
reading a lot of
Yes.
spiritual stuff.
Yes. My therapist said he did the same thing where his wife, because that was, I think, one of the most unexpected brilliancies of the person who set up this heal group, is that his wife had delivered at, I think, also around 32 weeks, and lost the baby. And so he is a product of understanding exactly what we're going through. And
Hmm.
he said at the very beginning, his wife couldn't even get out of bed. Like he had to dress her to go to the funeral. And he was like, I'm going to build a gazebo, and I'm going to build a porch, and I'm going to paint the
Yeah.
house. And she
And
was like, can you just stop? And that
yeah,
was his way of grieving.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think because we have such a good relationship, it didn't strain it, but I can see how it could be a strain on a relationship that's not in a good place, you
Right.
know, and that
But
there
it
could
goes
be
back to
changes.
that empathy of understanding that everybody reacts differently, and that
Hmm.
you have to process it the way that you process it. And as long as you can try and talk through it, and as long as you can be there for
Because
each
our
other.
communication is good. Yeah.
Exactly. So my
And
my process with my husband was different, because when I lost the baby, I was a surrogate. And so
yeah,
for him, he wasn't.
it wasn't his
Yeah,
direct loss.
exactly. He was sad for the loss, but he wasn't as affected because it wasn't his child. He
Hmm.
was more sad to see me in pain. And so he
Yeah.
was fortunately he was really available to be able to be there for whatever I needed. If I couldn't get out of bed and he was like, okay, don't worry, I'll make
Mhm.
dinner or I'll help get the kids to bed or
Yeah.
whatever, that part of it I really appreciated. And then one of the things I don't really talk about so often is that I then experienced my own miscarriage this past year in
Mm.
the end of March, beginning of April. It was during Passover, and
Oh, yeah.
we had decided that we wanted to try, if God can give us one more child, then we will gladly take it. And I got
Yeah.
pregnant at the end of February, and I knew sort of from the beginning that it wasn't a viable pregnancy because the heartbeat wasn't strong at the 6 and 7 week appointment. And so I was going in
Mhm.
every single week. And that loss hit him differently because
Yeah.
it was his. And it was interesting because for me
Yeah.
it didn't affect me as much as it had the first time because I was 16 weeks and 5 days
Yeah.
and I was preparing myself for this one. The first one was so out of the blue and there was no reason for it. This one was like, well, the heart rate isn't strong. And so I'm preparing you now. And so at 9 weeks, when I had a miscarriage, it was like, okay, yes, it's devastating, but I was able to process it differently, whereas it affected him in a much different way that time.
Yeah, it's so interesting how it's not logical what hits you and what doesn't. It's,
Yeah.
like, really not. I there was one another one. This was this was after, um, my 17-week loss, and before we decided to go to IVF. We had gotten
Mhm.
pregnant again because we weren't really infertile. Getting pregnant wasn't the problem.
Right. It was staying
Like,
pregnant.
yeah,
Right.
but I remember I went in and it was, like, for the first scan, and they were like, "Oh, there's no baby." I was like, "What?"
What do you
It's
mean?
like
It
that.
said I was
What they call,
pregnant.
yeah, it was like that. They call it like a chemical, like it's empty.
Hmm. Right. An
And
empty
like, they're
yolk
like,
sac.
what?
You're like, why are my
But
HCG levels going up?
I remember going back out to the waiting room because they had to schedule. They were going to schedule to, like, remove, like, whatever it was, like a
Mm.
procedure. Um, And I remember being with all the pregnant people in the waiting room. And there's art of babies all around the walls. And I'm just like, I lost it.
Yep.
But now in retrospect, like, that wasn't really like there was no baby.
Right.
Like, but for some reason I got super like,
Yeah. I know it's like one of those where when you're pregnant, you totally appreciate the art of the babies. And then when you've lost a pregnancy, you're like, I hate you right now. I hate this
yeah,
whole
like
office.
what?
Why torture me like this? But it has nothing to do with me. It has to do with everybody else who's expecting. And I just wanted to be like, I'm ripping all these down.
I know, I'm like gonna write to MGH, be like, you should really rethink your decor.
Right, maybe more abstract art would be better. Yeah.
Baby animal. Baby animal.
Right?
Stick with baby animals.
Something. I'd even settle for a baby alligator at that point, like anything.
Oh my god.
Yeah. So to wrap up, because I'm so honored and so blessed to be able to have this conversation with you and for you to be able to share it as easily as you have. Can you talk about one piece of advice that you would give to somebody who's also experiencing a loss?
um, I think something that I needed to hear early on that I don't think I really fully appreciated was, like, it's not your fault and it doesn't mean anything.
I think those words are so important.
Like, it
It was
means
one of my
everything, but it
right,
doesn't mean it,
right,
you don't have to make meaning of it and create a whole story about who you are as a person as a
right,
result of what happened.
right. That it's something that shouldn't define you. It's part of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
And
I
make the meaning of their life making mattering,
right.
their life creating, or you creating something in what you experienced of that.
Mhm. I think hearing it's not your fault is so important because even I'm now over a year removed. And I said to my husband a few weeks ago that it was so interesting because my head and my heart weren't communicating. at one point, and my heart was saying, "This is totally your fault. It's how could you not think it's your fault? This is ridiculous."
Mhm.
And my head was going, "It's not your fault. It's not your fault. It's not your fault." And my heart is sitting here saying, "Of course it's your fault. You had
Mhm.
4 totally normal pregnancies. Why couldn't you keep this one?" And when I finally realized that they weren't connected, I started doing breathing work, and I started doing the emotional processing. And I'm not a good meditator, but I'm really good at doing emotion code. And so I
Mhm.
started clearing a whole bunch of that stuff, and all of a sudden I
Yeah.
was like, "Okay, I'm a little bit more willing to hear it's not your fault." And if somebody else now says it to me, I'll believe it a little bit more.
Mhm. Yeah, this process will point out the things that you get to work on that are your
Yeah.
next level of evolution.
Yeah.
Like, and maybe that's the purpose. But
Yeah.
it's like, where do you get to grow in
It's
the
a
days
hard
that you
question.
have? Because they're really, it shows you that the days are valuable.
Yes. It's so true. And it makes you appreciate what's here and what's now and what's present.
Mhm.
100%. Well, thank you so, so much. I mean, I really can't even put into words how much it means not only to see you again, but to be able to connect with you on a level that obviously when I knew you before, like we weren't even parents then, so it
I
made a big
know, I
difference.
know. I think you were
But
just getting married or about to get married or something last time I saw you.
probably, I mean, that was 2010. So yeah, just
Yeah.
about then.
Oh my God.
I know. My husband and I are just past 13 years, which is weird because I was also pregnant with my daughter when my grandfather passed away. So his birthday was this past Saturday. For anybody listening, we're in November currently. So my grandfather's birthday was November 4th, and he would have been, I was trying to do the math and I was like 103, 104, 103. And I was like, that none of that makes sense to me because in my
Mhm.
head, he's still here.
Yeah, it passes so fast,
Yeah.
so fast.
Yeah. So thank you. And
Thank you for doing this work.
my
Thank
pleasure.
you
And
for
and I would love
creating
to, now that you're sort of back a little bit more on social media, I want to
this.
keep in touch more because I feel like the work that you're doing with your spiritual connection and being able to help other people process is so important. And I just can't wait to see what else you do with it.
Beautiful.
And also just we'll put in the show notes how anybody can get in touch with you if they want to be able to work through any
Oh
of
yeah,
that with you.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
It's my next it's what I'm doing in the space that's here.
Perfect. Which I think is such a beautiful way to celebrate the life and the lives
Mhm.
that you don't have here.
Mhm. And she's part of the energy work I do,
Yeah.
even though we don't talk about it, she and I. She's in it.
Right. Even though
She's
she's not
in
talking right
she's
now.
in the universe, she comes
Yeah.
through.
Yeah. I actually, one last thing before we wrap up, I kind of wonder if your daughter here will ever be able to communicate with her.
It's funny, I'm gonna sound woo-woo now, but um my daughter has a camera in her room,
Mm,
the little baby monitor thing.
right.
And ever since Jadee passed, a lot of times in the night I see orbs around floating around. Like there's no air moving,
That's
there's
totally her.
no, it's and I never had seen them before. And it's been enough times that I'm like, that's not just dust blowing around.
Yeah.
So
No,
yeah,
I am a
she's
full
looking
believer
over
of all
her.
that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. She's totally looking over her.
Very cool.
Amazing. Thank you for joining me today on Pushing Through Loss. I hope this episode has provided support, understanding, and a sense of community. Remember, you are not alone on your journey, and you have the strength to face the challenges that come your way. If you found value in today's conversation, please leave me a review and consider sharing it with others who may benefit. Together, we can help each other heal and activate our inner strength warriors. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations, and until next time, you got this.